Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and today we're going to be talking about Stormwatch number 0, which is actually going to require a little bit of an explanation. Let's zoom in and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. First published in August of 1993, with a relatively high price tag for the time of $2.50, the average usually was closer to $1.95 back then. Stormwatch, as you can see, was published by Image Comics at this time. Some of you may only have experienced Stormwatch as a DC property. That's because DC Comics bought out Wildstorm Comics from Jim Lee in 1998. And I believe they technically own all of the names and characters involved with Wildstorm. Though I should point out that this book actually predates the creation of Wildstorm Comics. This is literally just an Image published book. Brandon Choi, Jim Lee, co-creators and writers of the story. Brett Booth, Jeffrey Scott, pencils. Sal Regla, Alex Garner, inks. Joe Chiodo, colors. Chris Eliopoulos, I believe I'm saying that right, on letters. Jim Lee for layouts. Cover art, Scott Clark and Trevor Scott. Color assistants, Wendy Fouts, Paige. Not even going to try on that one. Sorry, Paige. Color separator, Chameleon Prime. And editor, Deborah Marvin. As we can see here on the right, there's a large space station. That is Skywatch. Skywatch is the home base of the Stormwatch teams. That's teams plural. There's more than one. They have different levels to their teams. Stormwatch 1 being the heavy hitters and strongest of the group. And they get progressively weaker members as the numbers get higher with 2 and 3 and so on. Stormwatch was actually created by the UN as a global peacekeeping force. It's actually not too dissimilar from Youngblood, except for the fact that Youngblood is directly under the control of the US government and Stormwatch is under the control of every member of the UN. We can see on the bottom here that the space station is currently being infiltrated by a couple of shadowy figures. And despite this being quite possibly the most incredible piece of human technology ever created in this flying space station, this ship was able to get by all of their sensors undetected because it had a cloaking device. I guess that was all they needed. On the next page, we see what looks to be New York City at night. It is not, though. It's actually the inside of the Stormwatch Combat Training Center. And you may be thinking to yourself, wow, that seems a lot like the Danger Room from X-Men. And that's because it is basically the Danger Room from X-Men. Jim Lee at this time was fresh off of working for Marvel and specifically working on X-Men, Uncanny X-Men at the time. And he takes a few ideas from that, and some of them I think are maybe tongue-in-cheek. We see down here in the bottom, Fuji, who is a giant muscle-bound monster guy. But I should point out, Fuji's form is not actually what we see here. It's not explained in this comic, but he's actually a being made entirely of energy, and the form that you see is a containment suit that's meant to keep him from, I guess exploding is the best term to use. It's talked about in later issues. We'll get into it later on. But that containment suit is nigh indestructible, and it gives him the ability to use his powers in a way of focusing them completely on physical strength. He's in a training mission here with Stormwatch 1 team leader. And I need to point this out because I made a mistake in the video with Youngblood number 0. This is Battalion. I accidentally called him Barricade in that video, and I do apologize. My memory is not as good as it used to be, and I don't always get everything right when I'm talking about comic books that I haven't read for 15 years. Battalion's powers are psionic in nature, not entirely dissimilar from Jean Grey, though he does have some abilities that I don't know that she does. He seems to use his powers mostly in a kinetic sense, almost like a telekinesis, where he's using them to strike people or throw them about. We see him doing that to Fuji in this frame, where he's hitting him with a large psionic blast that's knocking Fuji backwards as he and Fuji are engaging in some banter while they train. Now we get a good view here of Battalion, and he looks to be wearing what is some sort of weird space suit. His suit actually amplifies his psionic abilities. That's the reason for the dome and collar. It's supposed to increase his power level by a large margin. He is concerned that he's hurt Fuji with the psionic blast he hit him with. Of course, Fuji was just playing possum and using that for a sneak attack, and he pulls him underground. Then Battalion fires Fuji back. You'll notice down here that Fuji has no feet. This is not an error in the drawing, and it's not that they were lost in the explosion. This was a creative choice. Fuji actually has no feet. His legs end basically in stumps where his ankles would be. I don't know why this is, and I can't remember if it's ever explained. I don't believe it is. It was just an artistic choice, and it kind of fits for the character just because of how large he is and him needing like a very strong, sturdy base to support all of his weight. In the next frame, we see the team of mercenaries that broke into Skywatch, led by Marco. He is on a quest for revenge against Battalion. We'll find out why later on in the book. And Trask here is not happy with the fact that Marco is on this quest because they took this job to implant a computer virus into the Skywatch space station. They're found out by a Skywatch guard who is immediately killed. And Trask is upset about this because now he knows they're going to get caught at some point when people start finding bodies and bloodstains all over the walls. Marco, of course, does not take too kindly to Trask questioning his leadership, though. So here we see that Marco decides to just kill Trask for challenging his authority and then dares the other two mercenaries to do anything about it. They don't seem too concerned, though, and decide to just go on with the mission because they don't want to face his wrath either. And then they just kind of go on a killing spree, murdering more guards throughout Skywatch. Here we see that Battalion is coming up out of the ground. Fuji hits him with the big double fist. He's afraid that he's accidentally overdone it and doesn't realize his own strength. But Battalion is smiling because he's playing possum this time, and he's turned the tables on Fuji once again. So here we can see Fuji getting hit by another psionic blast. He's upset that he got had in the same way that he just tricked Battalion. Battalion tells him that, this is just part of training, and then they hear the alarm. The alarm is sounding, of course, due to the mercenaries being on board and them finding dead bodies all over the place. And we get the first communication and glimpse of Weatherman, who is not really necessarily in charge of Stormwatch, but is the overseer of the Skywatch space station. He also has to answer to the UN as well. Up here we see that the mercenaries have come into the training facility and are about to ambush Fuji and Battalion. So they open fire. There's a hailstorm of bullet casings, and Marco thinks that he's finally been able to fulfill his quest for revenge. However, they were mistaken, as we can see these were just holograms of Fuji and Battalion, and Marco and the rest of the mercenaries did not realize that they were in a not danger room from X-Men training facility. Battalion, of course, uses this time to ambush Marco, beats him within an inch of his life. Fuji subdues the other two mercenaries off screen, or off page, I should say, and is worried that Battalion's going to take it too far and potentially kill Marco. Battalion doesn't do this, but states that, he has no love lost for Marco and that whatever happens to him, whatever he gets, he deserves. So on the left here, we see an ad for Wizard magazine featuring a cover of The Wildcats by Jim Lee. Jim Lee, of course, had multiple Image properties that he produced, or I should say independent properties that he produced and released through Image. Wildcats being probably one of, if not the most successful of all. Wildcats at one point did get a cartoon in the 90s as well, had a toy line for a moment. Grifter is still active in the DC universe to this day, at least as I record this video, he is. And you can also see there's a contest that you can enter for a chance to win a Mortal Kombat arcade cabinet. Make sure to get those entries in. That cabinet is awesome. On the next page, we see that despite trying to relax and take a shower, Battalion is at full flex and 0% body fat, because comic books, of course he is, when his shower is interrupted by a buzz at his door. So at Battalion's door was Christine Trelawney. Now you may be wondering who she is and what her backstory is about. Well, you're going to have to keep wondering, because none of that is explained in this book. This is the only 2 pages that she appears on throughout this entire book. It's not explained what her history with Battalion is. It's not explained why she's not able to access information about the attack from the mercenaries from earlier in the day. Battalion does not like her at all. And again, we get no explanation as to why that is either. Further down on the right here, after she's left, we see Battalion looking at his reflection in the mirror, reflecting upon how his day has went and whether or not he can escape his past and what he's had to deal with to get to this point. The next page is pretty interesting. This is where his powers get a little bit more unique, as he covers his entire body in a psionic mask to hide his scars, not only from others, but from himself as well, which leads me to believe that it is creating some sort of a camouflage over him and is not a trick of mind control like another character would use with, telepathic abilities. I thought it was kind of a cool idea that was where they went with it. Again, these are where they take some liberties. Battalion's powers are not always clearly defined. They kind of operate in some aspects sort of like the Force from Star Wars, in that you kind of have a generalized idea as to what he can do with it, but sometimes there's some surprises about where it can go and how it can be used. Here on the next page, we get a close-up of Battalion as he has a flashback. We learn on these pages that Skywatch was not the first UN orbital peacekeeping satellite. It was actually a satellite called Monitor 1 that ended up being destroyed when it was hit by the tail of a comet. That event killed almost all of the crew, but the crew members that it didn't kill, it gave crazy powers to, and one of those people, of course, is this guy here, who is Battalion's father and the leader of a group of superhumans called War Guard. Their power was immense, but they were psychologically damaged, I believe, by the event, and they all essentially, for lack of a better word, became supervillains because of it. Lots of lives were lost to capture them and put them in stasis. Apparently, they're either unkillable or they didn't want to kill them because they wanted to research what happened to them. At the bottom of the page, we also get our first looks at Neptune and Flashpoint, who are 2 other Stormwatch members. As the flashback continues, we're teleported to New York City in 1978. This is where the original tests for Stormwatch were taking place. We see Battalion, Flashpoint, and Neptune here, all apparently racing on treadmills. This is to determine who is going to be the leader of Stormwatch, or is at least one of the tests that's to determine that. Flashpoint has some pretty unkind words for Battalion. It seems to be like they're just ribbing each other, but Flashpoint takes it too far and starts using some racist innuendo, which is not cool. Battalion's not happy about it. And on the bottom here, we see Mr. Windsor, who is in charge of determining all this. I don't know if he's the one who came up with the idea of creating Stormwatch, or he's just the man in charge of putting it all together. But he's not too preoccupied with stopping the conflict. He decides that it's better to just let the two of them work it out. So here we see Flashpoint strike Battalion. Battalion, of course, not happy about it, and hits him back and gives him a knockout punch, to which the rest of the scientists just seem to let go. Windsor is actually quite ecstatic about seeing Battalion's abilities in a fight and asks if he has anyone else back at his homestead who might be able to join the Stormwatch program. Battalion is not too happy about this. He doesn't want his younger brother involved. He tells him to keep Malcolm out of it. That's his brother's name. And I should point out, I didn't bring it up earlier because it's not clearly explained in this book. Apparently, all of the children of the members of War Guard also have superhuman abilities in some form or another and are referred to as seedlings, and were brought together by the United Nations as a way to be a superhero team for the forces of good. At least that's the way it reads. Again, it's not clearly explained in this book. On the bottom here, we see Windsor outfitting them with what he refers to as their costumes, which I found to be an odd choice of words. They are, for all intents and purposes, costumes, but it's actually high-tech military gear. All of their outfits are made out of Kevlar, so they act as body armor, which I thought was a really cool idea to explain that there is a purpose to what they're wearing. And as you can see down here, Battalion's, spacesuit is not the same as it was in the earlier panels. This, of course, taking place in 1978, and the earlier panels taking place in 93. So we see that there was actually an evolution in his gear where it was less bulky and the technology had gotten better. I thought that was a really cool touch that a lot of comics would not have touched on. In the next scene, we see that there's an explosion, and we see the terrorist group, the Third World Liberation Front, led by Marco, attacking because they believe that the UN has not done their due diligence in, I guess, stopping American imperialism and trying to help the third world. So, of course, the solution is to break into the UN headquarters with guns blazing and kill a bunch of people who have nothing to do with any of that. So on the next page, we can see that the terrorists, of course, waste no time in taking hostages and beating up scientists. Flashpoint wants to attack them, but Battalion tells him it's too dangerous for the hostages and that they need to wait for backup. He's, of course, communicating with his psionic abilities. That's another ability he has, is that he can talk to other people and hear their thoughts just with his mind. On the next page, we get our first really good close-up shot of Nautica. And I guess she's some sort of human fish type of hybrid thing. She has webbed fingers and fins, and she doesn't have a nose. But her powers don't necessarily totally match up with being a fish person, as we'll see as this book continues. And then at the bottom here, backup arrives in the form of Backlash, who rules, by the way. Backlash is one of the coolest characters in Stormwatch. He has totally dope energy whips that he shoots out of his hands. He quickly starts making short work of the terrorists, and at the same time, chastises the other members of Stormwatch for not having this handled before he got there. On the next page, we start to get descriptions of what the other members of Stormwatch can do. We can see here that Flashpoint is basically Cyclops from X-Men. And I don't mean in the sense that he's kind of like him. I mean he's almost identical to him. In fact, in the description of his abilities here, it actually says Foster McClane, which is Flashpoint's actual name, possesses the uncanny ability to project powerful optic energy beams. I really think this character may exist just as a troll job to Marvel. But he does have some key differences. He can control the speed, the power, and also the direction of his optic beam. And those were things that Cyclops couldn't do. He could only fire his beam in whatever direction his head was turned. You can see here that Flashpoint's optic beam operates more like Darkseid's Omega beam. Underneath, we can see here that Nautica can fly, which is what I meant when I was talking earlier about how her powers don't totally mesh up with being related to sea creatures. She can also build up an electrical charge, which I guess maybe is supposed to be reminiscent of something that an electric eel can do. And then she can discharge the electricity into people, which she does to some terrorists right here. Underneath, we get Battalion telling her she's doing a great job, but then he gets shot by Marco's brother in the back. He, of course, doesn't take kindly to this and quickly turns around and prepares an optic or psionic blast to hit him with. Unfortunately for Battalion, and even more unfortunately for the terrorist, this was the first time he had ever worn his suit, and it was before Windsor was able to explain to him that it magnified his powers. So he accidentally hits the terrorist, which is Marco's brother Pedro, with a psionic blast that's 100 times more powerful than what he thought he was hitting him with. This has the effect of not killing Pedro, but completely destroying his consciousness. He is alive, but he will never have any cognitive thought ever again. Marco, of course, is very upset about seeing his brother hurt in such a way. The rest of the terrorists bolt. Marco won't leave his brother behind and stays with him, and as a result is captured by Stormwatch. Now we finally see that Battalion is getting the explanation of what happened because he's not certain himself. And Backlash tells him, hey man, shrug it off. Don't worry about it. These guys were hell-bent on murder. And I have to agree with him. They were literally a terrorist organization storming the UN with machine guns, and their plan was to kill people and steal data from the UN. I really don't see why Backlash is so upset about, harming one of them more than he meant to. So here we see Marco being led away by some MPs and vowing to get revenge on Battalion for what he did to his brother Pedro, and Battalion telling him he'll be waiting. This, of course, brings us full circle back to what happened earlier in the book. And underneath, we can see when Windsor approaches Battalion and tells him he wants him to be the leader of Stormwatch 1 based on how he handled himself with the terrorist attack. Battalion agrees to this reluctantly, on the expressed condition that Windsor never approaches his brother Malcolm on joining Stormwatch, to which Windsor agrees. On the next page, we get a meeting with one of the terrorists and a mysterious woman who is not in any other part of this book. They don't explain who she is yet. He tells her that he engaged with people who had incredible powers. She says that means it was too late, that Stormwatch is already up and running. He also explains that they were not able to steal the data that she wanted, and she says that it's okay and that they're going to have to move on to Plan B, which involves Project Genesis as it shows on the file. So the next image we get is at the press conference where Windsor unveils Stormwatch to the entire world as the UN peacekeeping force. And we get our first view of this amazing, super huge laser gun. This thing rules. This is why I love 90s comics, man. This kind of absurd weaponry, costumes that don't make sense. It's just so overkill in its presentation, and we're supposed to take it like it's completely normal. You can see that Foster is not too happy about the whole thing. He states that he feels like one of the village people. But Nautica says that she enjoys it and that they're about to make the cover of News Weekly, which is not to be confused with Newsweek. Jim may have learned a few things about the legal troubles that Todd got himself in with using the actual logos of CNN and the E! Network. And then we're presented with an image of Battalion back in 1993, looking at photographs where he reminisces on the past. We are also brought to him looking at a man named John in a photo. It's not entirely explained who John is at this point, but it was someone that Battalion very much revered and believed that he should be emulating in his pursuits of trying to create a better world and establish more peace around the world. And we can also see that Battalion comes to the terms that he's not going to be able to escape his past, that his bad memories are just like the scars on his body and they're permanent. And it's kind of a real inner conflict that he's dealing with. He does want to make the world a safer place, but he really does struggle with the actions that he has to take in order to ensure that that happens. And that's the end of the story of this book. On the final page, we get an advertisement for Gen 13, which I can't believe I forgot was created by Jim Lee. I don't know how that escaped my memory. Like I said, it's not as good as it used to be. And I don't have very many, if any at all, issues of Gen 13. It was never really a comic that I got into, and I've never made a point to try and find any back issues of it. I'll have to really scour through my collection. If I come across Gen 13 #1 somewhere, I guess I can make a video about it at some point. On the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Deathmate Black. Deathmate was a mini-series collaboration between Image and Valiant. It had Image characters and Valiant characters in one combined story. I actually have every issue of this, so I will make videos about it at some point. But I've actually, I hate to admit it, never read through Deathmate. But, it'll be a cool read to go through for videos on the channel. And that's a look at Stormwatch #0. As I stated during the Youngblood #0 video, early Image was very heavy on superhero team books. And while it got a little overkill at some point, I will say Stormwatch is far and away one of my favorites of those books. I always liked the character designs in Stormwatch. I enjoyed the story. It almost always had really high quality artists working on the book. Generally speaking, I really, really liked what Jim Lee did with this title. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Leave any comments if you'd like to. I'll try to get back to whichever ones I can. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.